After that, there is the concept of friction. What is friction? So first of all, I suppose that there is object and I apply the force on that object towards the right. The object start moving towards the right. But sometimes when I apply the force on that object towards the right, it does not move. Why it does not move? Because here is another force which is acting in the opposite direction to the applied force. This actually slows down the motion of the body, due to which the object cannot move when you apply the force. You have to increase the amount of the force that you are applying on this object. So I can simply say, when this object does not move by applying the force, it means that there is a force which is acting towards the opposite direction. This force is basically the friction or the frictional force. What is the effect of this force? It actually slows down the motion of the body. So see this figure. First of all, here is the concept of a frictional force. There is a table which is moving towards left. You are applying here the force towards the left, due to which the table is moving towards the left. Whenever the object moves or not, there is always the frictional force. Sometimes the object does not move due to the friction. Sometimes the object moves, but they move with very small speed. So in this case, this table moves towards the left when you apply the force. Again, there is the frictional force which is acting in the opposite direction to the motion, and no, it's acting towards the right. So you can see here, friction is a force that opposes the motion of the object. It acts in the opposite direction to the direction of the motion of the object, which causes the object to slow down. First of all, you have to define what is meant by friction. And after that, what is the effect of the friction? Friction is basically the force that opposes the motion of the object. And the effect of the friction is that it slows down the moving object. Friction in the solid. So what is the friction in the solid? Again, I consider there are two blocks. Both of these blocks are in contact, but here I make very small separation between both of these. If I named these blocks 1 and 2. Now I suppose that I want to slide the box 1 over the second one. Then what will happen? I have to apply the force here. I suppose that I apply the force towards the right. Then the situation looks like that. When I apply the force on the first block, both of these blocks do not move. They remains at the same position. It means that the magnitude of the force or the amount of force that you are applying here, it is small. You have to increase its value. So again, I suppose I increase the value of this force. Then what will happen? The first object displaces very small towards the other direction. Like that. So why this object is not sliding over each other? It is because of the reason between both of these surfaces that are facing here, there is a friction present between them. Because of this friction, the object cannot easily slide over each other, because the effect of the friction is slows down the moving object as well as opposes the motion of the moving object. That's why this force is basically called as frictional force. I can simply say that when the two blocks are over each other and you want to slide one box over the other, then there is a force which is acting in the opposite direction to the applied force that tries to stop the block from sliding. This force is basically called as frictional force. Let's see its definition here. When you try to slide one box over another, there is an opposing force in the opposite direction to the sliding box that tries to stop the box from sliding. This opposing force is referred as the frictional force. So the opposing force that opposes the motion of the object is basically called as frictional force. You can also see here, trolleys are moving over the surface. These are moving towards the right, but the friction is present towards the left. It means that the friction is always opposes the motion of the object. First of all, we see that friction causes slow down the object. What is the second effect of this? What happens when the friction is present? So because of the friction, there would be the dissipation of the energy in the form of heat. Because when you try to slide one object over the other, they do not slide because the frictional force is present here. In this case, you are going to increase the amount of the force, so both of these objects heats up. It means that the energy is wasted in the form of heat energy. So you can see here, the friction causes the conversion of energy in the form of heat, which rises the temperature of the object and its surrounding. Because of the friction, there would be the heat produced, due to which the temperature of object and its surrounding increases. The friction in the solid is due to the imperfection in the surfaces of the object sliding over each other. It's basically because of the reason both of these surfaces of these blocks are not smooth. These are rough surface, due to which there are some imperfections in these surface, and when you try to slide over the other, because of this imperfection, you cannot slide these. So this imperfection basically results the friction. Because of this imperfection, these cannot move. So when they do not move, it means that there is a frictional force which is present in the opposite direction. So you can see here, the friction in the solid is due to the imperfection in the surfaces of the object sliding over each other. The friction not only slows the moving object, but it also dissipates the energy in the form of heat. So basically there are two effects of the friction. One is slowing down the moving object, and the second dissipate the energy in the form of heat energy. You can see here there is a simulation related to the friction in the solid. Effects are basically shown in the form of chemistry and the physics books. When you try to slide one book over the other, then what will happen? We will see here, I try to slide the chemistry over the physics. Both of these are moving, but still these surfaces are not touching. You can see by the molecules of these books that are shown by the blue and green circles. Now I move this below, then what will happen? Now you can see both of these are touching each other, and there is a thermometer which is showing the temperature. So when I slide it over it, you can see the temperature is changing. It's increasing. It is because of the reason there is a friction present between both of these books. Because of this friction, the temperature is increasing, because here is the dissipation of the energy in the form of heat energy. So this is basically the concept of the friction in the solid. You can also practice it from here. Next is the friction in the fluids. So which term is basically used to show the friction in the fluid? First of all, what is meant by the fluid? Fluid is anything that can flow. If I say that the water can flow, water is the fluid. After that, if I say the honey can flow, honey is the fluid. So anything that can flow easily, it is basically called as fluid. Fluid includes the liquids and the gases, because their particles can move around. So the same thing is given here. The fluid refers to anything that can flow. Fluid include the liquids and the gases, because their particles can move around. So when their particles can move, it means that they can flow. That's why the liquids and gases, both of these are fluid. What you can say about the solids? Either the solids are fluid? No. It is because of the reason the particles of the solid are very closely held to each other such that they cannot move. So when they cannot move, it means that they cannot flow. But the fluid is anything that can flow. That's why the solid is not a fluid. So what is meant by the friction in the fluid? You can see here, there is a moving water droplet and it's moving into the air, which is the fluid. Then what will happen? How many forces are acting on this? There are two forces acting on this water droplet. One is the weight, which is acting in downward direction. It is the force of the gravity of the earth acting on this droplet. And the second one is the drag force, which is acting in the opposite direction. Here the drag force is basically also be called as air resistance. It plays the role of friction in the fluids. So basically, I can simply say here, when the object moves through the fluid, initially there is only one force acting, which is the weight, and it's acting in downward direction. After that, with the passage of the time, when the droplet moves downward, it accelerates due to the force of gravity. There is another force which is acting in the opposite direction. It's the drag force. Because of this drag force, this droplet slows down. Because there is a concept of terminal velocity. Because of slowing down that droplet attains the terminal velocity, which is a constant velocity. So I can simply say that here the drag force plays the same role as that of the friction because it opposes the motion of this falling droplet as well as it slows down. So you can see here, friction acts on the object that are moving through the fluid as the particle of the fluid collide with the object. As a result, the work done against the frictional forces, the object heats up. When the work is done against the frictional forces, the object will heat up. The temperature of the object increases. This type of friction is basically occurs in the fluid and it is called the drag force and the air resistance. And this force is basically called as the drag force or air resistance. It is the friction in the fluid. Here you can see there is an example. When the water droplets moved through the air towards the earth, it encounters the resistance in the form of drag force in the opposite direction of the motion. The weight is acting in downward, drag force is acting in upward. Both of these are in opposite direction and it means that the friction is acting in upward and it is opposite to the direction of the motion of that falling water droplet.